Okay, so it's 7 o'clock, so I think we'll get going. Good evening, everybody. You're all very welcome to this Irish Wildlife Trust webinar on marine protected areas. We're delighted you could join us. In case you haven't been to an IWT event before, or if this is new to you, I'll introduce myself. My name is Pádraig Fogarty. I'm the campaign officer with the IWT. The Irish Wildlife Trust is a national non-governmental organisation. We've been around since 1979, and our mission is to campaign for wildlife and to protect nature and its importance for people. So tonight we'll be talking about the ocean. The ocean is a very important part of the work that we have been doing. It's often been said that the ocean is too big to fail. We sometimes forget that Ireland is surrounded by water. We sometimes forget about our oceans, but really the oceans are absolutely central to many things, to the fight against climate change and to protecting our biodiversity, and it's also vital from a cultural and a social and an economic point of view. So my badge today, you'll see I'm wearing the pin for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And goal number 14 is to protect life below water. And this, I suppose, underlines how connected all these things are, that the ocean is so essential to lots of other things. And we can't do meaningful climate action or biodiversity protection without protecting the ocean. So today we're going to talk about one of the big solutions that has been offered up in that fight to protect the ocean, and that is marine protected areas. Now, just some housekeeping for you before we meet the speakers. And number one is that our talk, we plan to finish up our talk around 8 o'clock. We're recording tonight, and the video will go on to the Irish Wildlife Trust YouTube channel, where you'll be able to watch it and share it later. And if you have any questions, you'll notice that there is a Q&A button at the bottom. And so please put your questions into the Q&A button, and we will come to them later. So without further ado, I want to introduce our two fantastic guests for you this evening. And first up is Adrian Gahan. And Adrian is coming to us from London this evening. He represents the National Geographic Pristine Seas in the UK. He has been central to the UK campaign to establish and implement a blue belt of at least 4 million square kilometres of ocean under protection across a number of UK overseas territories. He was policy advisor to members of Parliament and included advising on the Climate Change Act in 2008, which was the world's first legally binding legislation to reduce greenhouse gas pollution by 80% by 2050. Adrian has also worked with the delegation of the European Commission to the United States in Washington, D.C., and he has a degree in history and politics from University College Dublin in European Studies from the University of Cambridge, and I believe he told me he's from County Kildare. So over to you, Adrian.
Thanks very much, Pádraig, and it's very nice to be invited to give this talk. I'm very grateful for the opportunity, and thanks to so many people for joining. So I'm just going to share my screen so you can see my my slideshow. So if you'll give me a moment here, I'll get that.
You should be okay to share there, Adrian, yeah? Okay.
How's that?
Yeah, great stuff.
Is that on the projection screen?
Yeah, looking good.
Great. Okay. So first, let me just tell you a little bit about the Pristine Seas program at National Geographic. So National Geographic is a charity based in Washington, D.C. It's obviously part of the National Geographic media company that has the channel and the magazine, but the non-profit is a science and exploration charity based in Washington. And Pristine Seas is a program that was founded in 2007 by a fantastic Spanish marine biologist called Dr. Enrique Sala. And our mission is to protect 20 of the last great wild places left in the world's ocean by 2020. So by the end of this year was our mission. So our model is that we do what National Geographic does very well, which is we conduct expeditions, we go and visit these beautiful places, we conduct science at these places, and then we turn the science and the expedition into beautiful documentaries and a short film and a longer film. And then we use the science and we use the media as lobbying tools, as policy tools, and we take them to governments and make the case to them as to why these places are special and why they should be protected. So I have the role of being the UK and Europe policy director. So unfortunately, I'm not a marine biologist or a camera person, so I don't get the fun of going on a lot of these expeditions. I've been to a few of these beautiful places, but unfortunately, my job is mostly behind the desk. So this is a map of our work thus far, and after 13 years, Pristine Seas has been responsible for designating or being party to designating 22 large protected areas around the world. And you can see in green are the protected areas, and then the blue dots are ones that are soon to be completed. So I am lucky enough to do this in the United Kingdom. For the UK has, not many people know this, but the UK has 16 overseas territories, which are the sort of legacy of empire, if you will. Here's a map of them, and they're representative of a wide range of geographic ecoregions right across the world's oceans. They are places that were once part of the British Empire, but were given the opportunity to become independent, but chose to remain part of the UK. So they're not to be confused with, for example, members of the Commonwealth, which is just a sort of nominal association, or crown dependencies like the Channel Islands or the Isle of Man. These places are actually parts of the United Kingdom, but are based in far-flung parts of the world. And that means that the oceans around of these places are also considered British waters. And the way that international maritime law works, and I know Regina is going to tell you a bit more about the basics of MPAs, so I won't go into that quite in the same detail, but the basis of the law is that 200 miles off of the coast of a country are the territorial waters of that country. And then so in those 200 miles, be it oil and gas, resources, fish, belong to that country. And that means that the jurisdiction of that country extends out to those 200 miles. Or in the case of countries like in Europe where they're close together, they will agree a median line somewhere between the borders of both countries. So for example, between Ireland and Great Britain, there's a median line down the Irish Sea, because obviously 200 miles is would be too wide. So this gives the UK the rare privilege of having 6.8 million square kilometers of ocean, which is the 5th largest marine estate on the planet. So as a part of the National Geographic Pristine Seas program, we approached a number of UK partners, including a number of leading UK NGOs. So the RSPB, which is the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, Greenpeace, the Marine Conservation Society, Pew Trusts, and the Zoological Society of London, and an organization called Blue Marine Foundation. And with them, we created a coalition to campaign to the UK government to protect as many of these overseas territories' waters as is possible. We started this back in 2015, and it's it was quite fortuitous because we were able to run it alongside, if you remember, the Blue Planet 2 series that ran in 2016 and 17 over that winter. And we ran a campaign, #BackTheBlueBelt, to encourage members of parliament to do it. So by the end of the campaign, we had 285 members of parliament, which is, you know, the 650 MPs in the UK Parliament. So it was over 40% of UK MPs were backing our campaign to protect a number of these sites. And we got the commitment into 4 of the election manifestos in the 2 subsequent elections. So it's been a real success, and I'd love to discuss with people whether this is the sort of public engagement campaign that we could try and do in Ireland. So this has resulted in 4.2 million square kilometres of ocean as a part of 63% of the UK's waters being put under protection. And of that 63%, 2.8 million are no-take zones. So this, and I know Regina's going to talk about this some more, where you've got different types of MPAs, marine protected areas. Some are fully protected where you literally can't do any fishing inside them. Others are partially protected, so you can engage in certain types of fishing activity, but maybe the most destructive types are banned. People often wonder, God, does that mean you have to have, boats and ships enforcing all of these far-flung parts of the world? Well, not so. Luckily, thanks to modern technology, a lot of it is done now by satellites, where they monitor the territorial waters. And I would urge you to look up a website called Global Fishing Watch. It's a fascinating technology, and you can see these fishing boats. You can tell by the speed and the direction that they're traveling whether they're fishing or not, and then their data can be tagged. And then there's been a development in international law called the Port State Measures Agreement, which then means that if fish have been illegally caught in a country's waters and they then go and try and offload those fish in another country's waters, historically the port country couldn't do anything about it because the vessel hadn't broken any laws in that country's territorial waters. But now, using the evidence from other countries, the port state can apply the law. And this means that you can enforce these MPAs without having to have very expensive and difficult ship and vessel enforcement all around the world. So what does all this mean? It means that we're making progress. We're not where we hoped we'd be, but we're doing pretty well. By we, I mean global community. I don't mean National Geographic. So approximately 7% of the world's ocean is under some form of protection. And of that, less than 3% is in no-take. But there was a global target to try and get to 10% by the end of this year. And we haven't quite got there. But actually, please look out in the next few weeks. There'll be another huge designation in the United Kingdom, the last of our big campaigns in the Blue Belt program, at a place called Tristan da Cunha in the South Atlantic. And we hope that close to 700,000 square kilometers will be designated there before Christmas. So look out for that. I hope it'll get some coverage in the media. So that will get us closer to 9%. And hopefully France might make a designation before Christmas, which will get us to 10%. So fingers crossed, we'll get to 10%. But the aggregate science, as their meta-analysis, argues that actually, if you want to sustainably harvest 2/3 of the world's ocean, you need to set 1/3 aside under protection if you don't want the whole system to collapse. So we need to try and find 30% of the ocean to be put under protection by 2030. So that is the 10-year goal that we hope the global community is going to sign up to in the next round of what's called the Convention on Biological Diversity. But I won't get into that now because it's a whole other discussion. So what does this mean for Ireland? Well, it's a very interesting case for Ireland because as you can see here, if you follow the green star, Pristine Seas, National Geographic, has got to the end of our 10-year mission. We've designated 22 sites when we hoped we'd designate 20. So we now want to, over the next 10 years to 2030, to meaningfully contribute to that 30% target by 2030. And that means we want to find another 40 sites. So we want to double our impact from the first 10 years. So collectively, we want to have done 60 marine protected areas by 2030. So how will we identify these next 20 sites over the next 10 years? So my brilliant science colleagues have engaged in a global ocean conservation priorities mapping exercise. And what they did was, and I can circulate the paper to those of you that are interested, but the exercise looked at the global ocean on three lenses. One, what parts would you protect if you wanted to protect the most amount of nature, you know, the most biodiversity? Two, what parts would you protect if you wanted to enhance global food security, so enhance actual fish catch production? And three, what parts would you protect if you wanted to mitigate climate change? Because the ocean seabed, particularly actually around the Baltic Sea, the North Sea, the English Channel and so on, very carbon rich because there's a lot of sediment down there. Trawling spills up a lot of what they call sort of benthic sediment up into the water column. How much of it goes into the atmosphere yet? We're not entirely sure, but a lot of it is going in and re-acidifying the water column. So it does have climate impacts, and the science on that is fast developing. So my colleagues mapped the world and said, if we're going to find 40 new sites, where should we go based on these three priorities? And if you look around Ireland there, you'll see that it's in red, which is 95 to 100% of the top percentile. So the top 5% of global percentile under the food production lens. So that means that if we wanted to protect places, not exclusively for food production, but primarily in order to enhance catch returns, you would want to do it around Ireland. So the science on this is very interesting. If you look at the graph on the left, it basically shows you if you have a fully protected area, so a no take, then the return on biomass, so the amount of fish that you'll find in that marine protected area, again, a meta-analysis, so a collection of a lot of different studies, shows that it's over 600%, 670% more fish by biomass in a fully protected area. In a partially protected, where, for example, you might have banned trawling, but you'd still have some forms of pots and stationary gear, gill nets and such, you still get a better 343% more biomass than in an area with no protection. And a new study, which was covered in the Times in London only last week, if you see the date there, October 27th, was a report by my colleagues. And again, I can circulate any of these papers to those of you that are interested, but it showed that if you strategically expand the existing global MPA network to protect only an additional 5% of the ocean, it could increase future catch by at least 20% via spillover. So by spillover, they mean it's effectively like a fish bank. You're protecting an area and more fish can breed in there. They reach their sexual maturity without getting caught. Then they have more offspring, and there's a spillover of more fish out into the wider ocean outside of the MPA. And that would generate 9 to 12 million metric tons more food annually. So this is actually a pro-fishing argument. And if there's any representatives of fishing associations or fishermen on this call, I would urge you not to feel threatened by what we're proposing here, because this is not an anti-fishing endeavor. This is actually trying to ensure that there will be future fishing forever for everyone if we followed this route. So Ireland is a prime site to get these maximum returns, because the studies show that if you strategically expand the existing network, and by strategically it means choosing the best 5% spots, and Ireland is one of those. So it's a very, very important opportunity. And quite serendipitously, at around the time this study was being done by my colleagues in the United States, the Programme for Government came out in Ireland, and in it commits, and I quote, "We will realise our outstanding target of 10% under the Marine Strategy Framework Directive as soon as is practical, and aim for 30% of marine protected areas by 2030. So that is Irish government policy under this coalition government. And also there's the EU's 2030 biodiversity strategy, which also commits to 30 by 30. So that's very nice coincidence, shall we say, that the science is really pointing in the right direction, and Ireland is actually one of the top places in the world that we could do this. So I'm really here to say that I know a lot of fantastic work has already been done by Pádraig, by Regina, by lots of Irish NGOs, by Irish scientists and so on. So National Geographic is here and delighted if we could help you guys in whatever way we could by partnering with NGOs, with fishing communities, with the science community. Love to go and give presentations to TDs, whatever, just to make the point that Ireland has a rare opportunity, and that this is nothing to be feared. It's a real opportunity to be grasped. And I just want to finish with a positive story. And this is a place in Mexico at the bottom of the Baja Peninsula, so on the Pacific side of Mexico, on the western side. And it was completely overfished by the late 90s. It had effectively collapsed. And the fishermen there basically had a choice. Are we going to watch ourselves catch the last of our fish, or are we going to try and do something about it? So they petitioned the Mexican government to establish a marine protected area there. And they established only 70 kilometers in size, 70 kilometers in size, a full no-take marine reserve. And in 10 years, this is what it looked like. That is the same rock in the same place 10 years later. All the big fish came back, and the big fish as well, you know, the big groupers, the big apex predators, the sharks, tuna, beautiful, beautiful, all the big fish came back. The full trophic chain returned. And importantly now, in Cabo Pulmo, it's now a World Heritage Site, and the place is doing absolutely booming from tourism. So the fishermen that used to fish now fish outside of the 70-kilometer zone, and they catch more fish and bigger fish than they ever caught before. And a lot of their neighbors are now into sports and tourism, and there's a whole economy down there that didn't exist before. So the point is that there should be more than just fishermen making an economic living out of the ocean. It's not only fishermen's right to make a living from the ocean. People that work in the services economy, people that work in hotels, people that work in sport, water sports, people that work in scuba diving, all of those are just as entitled. And it's not a zero-sum game. For the fishermen, you know, for other people to win, the fishermen don't have to lose. Everyone can benefit. It's a fantastic success story. And you just need to look at the story of fungi, you know, God bless him, in Dingle, where, you know, I read only the other day that they think that over 1 million people travel to Kerry to see fungi over the course of the 30 years. It's absolutely incredible. And just think of all the economic beneficiaries down there right across the economy. So that's a model that we would like to see that could be played out all across Ireland and across the world over the next decade. So with that, thank you very much, and look forward to having some questions and answers after. I hope I haven't overrun my time there, Pádraig. Sorry about that.
Not at all, Adrian. That was excellent. Really, really good. And a real sense, I think, of the opportunities that come from marine protected areas, and particularly for doing it properly, you know, actually having the management in place and doing the engagement, and, you know, actually, you know, doing it meaningfully is where the real opportunity lies. So thanks very much for that. We'll be back to you later with some questions, no doubt. We're going to move on now to our second speaker of the evening. We didn't have to go too far to find Regina. Regina holds a bachelor's degree in marine biology and a master's degree in climate change impacts on our ocean. She's worked for the Irish Wildlife Trust now for over 2 years, specialising in issues around marine protected area management and designation. She's our project officer for the Bigger and Better Marine Protected Area campaign, which we work on with Seas at Risk, which is a Brussels-based NGO, and NGOs in France and also in Portugal. So over to you, Regina.
Thanks very much, Pádraig. Okay. Yeah, so thanks, Adrian. That was a really nice overview and a bit of a global perspective as well, where we need to be. I'm maybe going to bring everyone back down to earth because I'm going to talk about the issues we have in Ireland and a bit of the work that we have yet to do here. A bit of an introduction. Adrian already explained really well what an MPA is, what it's supposed to do. Just to highlight again that there are different types. So people hear marine protected area, they might immediately assume, okay, it's an area set aside only for nature. We can't go there. We can't do anything. That's not true at all. There are different types. There are multi-use sites where some level of extractive activities can still take place, but there are also no-take zones that are strictly set aside for nature, where you can't extract anything. And really, you should have a good mixture of both to get the best of both worlds in a way, to really get biodiversity benefits, but to not exclude commercial activities completely. There are some common characteristics, however, for both multi-use or no-take zones. According to IUCN guidelines, really there should be no industrial activities taking place inside a marine protected area. It kind of defeats the purpose. And the conservation of biodiversity is the primary goal of a marine protected area. So why do we need MPAs? From a biodiversity perspective, they're great because across the board, you can see that as soon as you remove extractive activities, you get an increase in species richness, you get an increase in biomass. That's partly because if you stop fishing for the biggest fish, the remaining fish will grow bigger in size and they'll produce more and fitter young. And what you can see generally is that if you have a healthy, well-balanced ecosystem, the entire area is also more resilient to threats such as climate change or pollution. Biodiversity is great and we absolutely rely on it, but there are some other kind of ecosystem services, they're called. So services that ecosystems provide to humans free of charge. And that's food provision, tourism, carbon storage, coastal protection, to name a few. And I'm going to talk about each of them separately. So this is all in an Irish context now. Food provision, Adrian already talked about. I mean, Ireland isn't doing all that well in general regarding fish stocks. That's partly down to not so great fisheries management. We could see a graph here that's North Atlantic predatory fishes declined by nearly 90% over the past century. And that's just an example here is the cod. And we know that cod is still doing badly today. Scientific advice is zero catch for 2021 and 2022 in the west of Scotland stock. And just today, there was a report out by Birdwatch Ireland, and they also show that Ireland is not great at following scientific advice when it comes to managing fisheries. And quite often, Ireland has actually pushed for the total allowable catch to be higher than scientific advice. And in this exact cod stock in the west of Scotland, fishing mortality has actually increased since 2016, even though the scientific advice was zero catch. So not a very great picture for cod. It's also concerning because predatory fishes are absolutely vital to the health of the marine ecosystem. So if we're seeing a decline there, it should be real alarm bells for us. Similar story, unfortunately, though, with herring as well. Herring's not doing well at all. Again, scientific advice is that there should be zero catch in 2021 for Irish Sea, Celtic Sea, and southwest of Ireland stocks. But you know, as Adrian mentioned, the paper that only came out recently, that if we really strategically place marine protected areas in places that that are important for food production, very highly productive areas, we can really turn this around. So marine protected areas could be a really useful tool to actually increase catches, just based on overspill. Moving on to tourism. So just the map down here shows even just humpback whale sightings in the southwest of Ireland. Off the coast in Kerry, really important kind of tourism destination for whale watchers. We actually have a total of 25 cetacean species in Irish waters. Now, humpback whales especially have made a huge comeback, thankfully, since the ban on whaling. But there's more that we can do, and this comes back now to the food sources. They rely on herring as well. We know herring isn't doing so great, so strategically placing MPAs that can benefit both us and the whales. Also important because we need to reduce ocean noise, so protected areas where noise can be managed a bit better, ship strikes can be managed, and dolphins as well could be protected from bycatch. One kind of topical ecosystem service provided by our coastal ecosystems, including seagrass, is carbon storage. And coastal ecosystems actually sequester up to 20 times more carbon than terrestrial forests. And it's a shame most of our coastal ecosystems are actually not doing so great. There are pressures like pollution, but also fisheries and aquaculture just operating in the wrong places, unfortunately puts a big strain on these ecosystems. So seagrass is one example of that. We've seen huge declines in Ireland. There is something we can do about that, thankfully. Again, protected areas with targeted restoration can really increase biodiversity and also carbon storage. There's an example in the UK where Seagrass Ocean Rescue is actually restoring a large seagrass bed in Wales, and they've collected 1 million seeds from existing seagrass beds, planted them, and they're going to end up with about 2 hectares worth of seagrass, which will sequester around 1 ton of carbon per year. So again, a win-win from a biodiversity perspective and from a climate perspective. And here's where we can piece 2 pieces of the puzzle together. We've just talked about cod declines. We've talked about seagrass declines, and actually cod relies on seagrass. Cod, and as well as many other commercial fish species, rely on healthy coastal ecosystems for at least part of their life cycle. In this case, it's seagrass, really important nursery habitat. So again, protecting seagrass, restoring seagrass, absolutely vital if we want to restore cod populations. Another perspective of natural solution to climate change, in this case it's adaptation. We often talk about mitigation because it just so happens carbon storage, it's always a win-win, but climate change is already upon us, so we also need to think about adaptation. Coastal flooding is a huge issue now, and again, this is where healthy marine ecosystems can help us. So this is an image from IUCN Water, and it just shows the natural infrastructure for water management. And if we just focus on the bottom right here, just of the marine ecosystems, protecting and restoring reefs, for example, that could be coral reefs, bivalve reefs, either oysters or mussel beds. It could be kelp forests that can really help kind of put this 3-dimensional barrier into the coast that perhaps has been degraded over the years, and I'll get to that in the next slide. Same with salt marsh. Salt marsh is a natural barrier between land and sea. Rebuilding salt marsh can really help with coastal flooding. So in that context, I want to talk about the native oyster, Ostrea edulis. The map here shows roughly where the current distribution is, mostly on the west coast. There's actually some beds left there, and they're still commercially fished on a very small scale. But it turns out on the east coast, we also used to have oysters, and quite extensive beds even. It says here in an historical record that oyster dredging grounds extended almost continuously from Wicklow Head to Carnsore Point. And we know that we had several natural beds in Dublin Bay even, and they were all fished out, unfortunately. Interestingly, we have a few marine protected areas in the Irish Sea. None of them mention the restoration of oysters as a conservation objective, because at the time that the MPAs were designated, the oysters were already gone. So they're not part of that MPA's objective to restore oysters, which is a shame. If you think about the extensive bed that would have been there, it's like roughly the bottom east coast there of Ireland, Wicklow Head to Carnsford Point. It's a really extensive area. That would have been extremely important. Ecosystem engineer, oysters are very important for biodiversity, and also probably would have had benefits for coastal protection, a reduced erosion possibly, and of course would have supplied local jobs. So looking at creating marine protected areas where we specifically restore oysters on a larger scale. It is done already in Galway Bay and several other beds on the west coast, but do it at a larger scale could have really huge benefits. I want to talk about another species as well, which is unfortunately in decline in Ireland. That's essentially all shark, ray, and skate species. In this case, angel shark declined by almost 95%. And in fact, out of 58 species that were assessed, more than 2/3 are classed as either near threatened, vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered. We know that Tralee Bay and Clew Bay used to be one of the last strongholds for these species. Both of those are marine protected areas already, but even there we're seeing declines. So unfortunately, sharks aren't listed under the annex of the Habitats Directive. That's what all of our MPAs are protected under. So we know that sharks are declining steeply, critically endangered, but we're not doing anything to reverse that trend. And it is extremely worrying. Similar to the declines in cod and the other predatory fish species, we know apex predators are really important for the functioning of an ecosystem, and they're declining and we're not doing anything about it. So again, marine protected areas specifically for the protection of sharks, it can be as easy as banning bottom trawling or dredging, because that's partly what's causing this decline. It's that we're reducing the habitat, nursery habitat, as well as feeding habitat. We're reducing their food source. So restricting certain activities in protected areas can already have huge benefits for sharks. I've managed to get to this point without showing a map. Here it is. There's not that much to see in Ireland. Those are our current marine protected areas. We have 7 sites in the offshore. 6 are in the Atlantic and 1 tiny one in the Irish Sea. And along with some of the inshore sites, they cover about 2.4% of our marine region. The target, of course, was 10% by 2020, which we missed by a long shot. And as Adrian mentioned, the new target is 30% by 2030. So we've got a more than 10-fold increase in about 9 years. So what are they actually protecting? These are the offshore sites only, overlaid with fishing pressure. We can see those 2 images on the side here are super trawlers over 100 meters in length. Both of those operated in our offshore MPAs this year. Now, to be fair, they're pelagic trawlers, and those MPAs in the Atlantic are protected for benthic habitats only. They're protected for coral reefs. But going back to the IUCN definition of a marine protected area and the IUCN guidelines, really there should be no industrial activities inside a marine protected area. And also going back to protecting food sources and protecting also whales. You know, why can't we protect the whole site? Why does it have to be just the seafloor? Why can't we leave super trawlers out of a protected area? That's the Atlantic sites. The ones in the small one in the Irish Sea. This analysis by the Marine Conservation Society has shown that actually there was about 500 hours worth of bottom trawling in that SAC between 2015 and 2018. So clearly not much protection there. So this is what the Atlantic sites are designated for. Absolutely stunning cold water coral reefs, incredible areas. The little map down there shows roughly where else you could find those. So certainly there's a lot of potential for further protections. Moving on to the inshore, things are similarly depressing, unfortunately. This is not a before and after shot, thankfully. The photograph on the right was taken in a marine protected area where the reef is hopefully still intact, as far as we're aware anyway. The shot on the left was also taken inside a marine protected area, but after a dredger has been through and completely wrecked the reef that used to be there. So the image on the right shows a serpulid worm reef, and that's exactly what we would have seen on the left-hand side as well. It's really quite depressing seeing this sort of thing, because we know there are declines in seagrass, there are declines in the shark species, declines in oysters. All of this can be managed much better if we only had protected areas that actually meant something. And dredging and bottom trawling, it's like you know, bulldozing a forest just to catch some deer. And in this case, they're probably fishing for scallops. And there is actually an alternative to that. You can simply dive, scuba dive, and hand pick scallops. It's a viable fishery. It's done in Scotland. For some reason, it's illegal in Ireland. Kind of not understandable, really. So moving forward, really, we need to designate protected areas that are a little bit more ambitious, have conservation objectives that take account of the historic data, such as did there used to be an oyster reef there? They have to have management plans that are implemented and enforced. And I believe we need to protect the whole site. This feature-based protection just isn't working. And we need to restore, actively restore what we've lost. That's seagrass, oysters, and other bivalve reefs, that's mussels, for example. We need to look at protecting salt marsh better and restoring it, kelp as well, and of course we need to rebuild fisheries. And stakeholders must be included at every step. That's, I think, the key mistake that we did when we designated the current MPAs that we have, that stakeholders weren't consulted properly. So there isn't any buy-in. But if it was done right, I think there would be a huge benefit for everyone. But that would cost money, of course. You have to invest. But again, studies have shown that actually it's worth it. The returns are worth it. So I want to end on this. It's a bit of a good news story. Something that happened this year was that the last government asked an MPA advisory group to write a report that can advise the minister on how to expand our current network of marine protected areas to cover 30% by 2030. Now, I know there were great people on this advisory committee, and we're really excited to see the report. We have every reason to believe that it will be very ambitious. So it'll be out for public consultation probably some later this month, later this year, who knows, could be next month. But it's really important that we get this next step right, and I'm very excited to have Adrian here as well to talk a bit more about this. So how do we expand the network? Well, it's in my opinion not really about expanding, it's about creating it in the first place, because as I said, the current network just isn't working.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Regina. I mean, it is grim. I think there's a failure there on two parts. There's a failure, obviously, to do all the things that we had already committed to, but there's also an awful failure in terms of a lack of a vision and a lack of ability to grasp the opportunities that I think
Yeah.
come from marine protected areas. Adrian, I just have before we go on to questions from the attendees, I just have a question from yourself, because you've showed us, these amazingly large areas in mostly tropical seas, and you showed us the picture from Mexico and so on, that this is working, but I know the UK has tried a few steps ahead of us on this. They've created marine conservation zones. Can you give us an impression of how that has gone, and maybe what lessons we can learn from the path the UK has taken so far?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. So I would say that the UK has done, I mean, they've done an exceptional job, a really brilliant world-leading job in the overseas territories. The UK has not done a particularly good job in its home waters. So I think that distinction needs to be made. I think the reason why it was easier to do it in the overseas territories is because they are very far away. There's not many fishermen there. And therefore, they're, in politics, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So in Irish politics and British politics, fishermen make a lot of noise. And all you need to do is look at the Brexit negotiations, and it's pretty much down to two issues now standing in the way of a free trade agreement, and one of them is fishing. 12,000 people work in fishing in the UK. There's 65 million people in the UK, and 12,000 of them work in fishing. So that gives you a sense of the ability of the sector to, I don't think it's unreasonable to say, capture some of the policy-making process. That wasn't the case in the overseas territories. So it was easier to do it. We first went for the uninhabited places and the most remote ones. And also because of the breakthroughs in satellite monitoring and in international legislation, it made it easier. In the UK's home waters, it's easy to be hard on Ireland because, to be honest, Ireland has an abysmal record. But, the UK has only a very marginally better one. Of all of the UK's home waters, and by home I mean around GB and Northern Ireland, there is actually only 16.4 square kilometres of no-take zone. 16.4 square kilometres, tiny, tiny area. So that's less than 0.01% of the UK's waters. 99.9% of the MPAs are in the overseas territories. Not every country has the confetti of empire with which to play in order to be an international biodiversity champion. So, but where the UK is ahead of Ireland from my observation, and I don't know enough about, because I've never worked on Irish marine issues, but I think that in the UK, the policy capacity exists to establish laws to protect marine zones from 0 to 12 miles, and then from 12 out to 200, or the median line, needs to be negotiated as part of the European Union, which will of course change from January, and the UK should be able to unilaterally protect from 12 to the median line as well, depending on the outcome of the FTA. So that is better than the Irish situation, where I understand there is actually no legal capacity in Ireland to establish an MPA outside of those Natura 2000 sites, which is clearly insufficient. And if Ireland, my first observation would be is if the Irish government was serious about meeting the target it set for itself in its coalition program for government, then it would change the legislation quickly to allow itself to establish no-take, highly protected, as well as other forms of protected MPAs in Irish waters outside of the Natura 2000 sites. That should be the first thing that they would do, and they could do that quickly if they wanted to, I would have thought.
Adrian, you mentioned there about the capture of politicians, I suppose, by the fishing industry. But I mean, I know in Ireland anyway, it's, you know, we see there are pretty significant divisions within the fishing industry, and you know, we see that a lot of the time it's the what are called the producer organizations that actually represent a minority of the boats. So sometimes they present this this image that we are the fishing industry, but there's not really one fishing industry. And a lot of the guys who are fishing with pots and probably doing very minimal damage, if any damage at all, are not necessarily represented at all at that level. So your 12,000 jobs may even be much smaller if it was, you know, divided in, certainly in Ireland. I presume it's similar in the UK, is it?
I think that's absolutely right. The vast majority of fishing jobs are in the under 10s, so the under 10 meter boats, who only fish out to 6 and 12 miles. And in fact, their livelihoods are often damaged by the super trawlers and the industrial fishing that's trawling the spawning grounds and that farther out. So it's not correct to say that there's one unified, fishing lobby. And actually, often you'll find that some of the smaller inshore fishing boats have more in common with the conservation goals than they would with the larger fishing boats.
Yeah, absolutely. We saw that here in Ireland last week. Birdwatch and IWT and a number of other environmental organisations joined with the inshore fisheries representatives to call on the Minister for Agriculture to reinstate a ban on trawling. So I think that was a very important step. Regina, I have a question here from let me see, a question from Lorcan Scott, who is asking, like, given our island status and the world attention that we get from the Wild Atlantic Way, do you feel there are benefits to be gained by designating a small number of national parks in the marine area? And I think the government did commit to this. Do you think the national parks have any role to play here?
Yeah, look, it completely depends on how you manage it. It doesn't matter what you call it. If you protect an area and you manage it well and it has some benefit to biodiversity, then absolutely, yeah. It would have great tourism benefits. You can have Wild Atlantic Way signs with the national park, you call it whatever you want. The government, yes, has committed to an offshore marine national park. Sounds great. Yeah, I think tourists would love that. I'd go to it.
Of course, we've a great record in Ireland of putting up the signs and then thinking that's the job done. We can
exactly.
Go home and do something else.
It has to have biodiversity benefits.
Yeah. Regina, I mean, as you know, we've got all kinds of goals in Ireland now with the new government in terms of reducing greenhouse gases, and we have our climate bill is currently in the Oireachtas. And of course, there are huge plans for wind turbines now and wind parks out in the offshore area. Do you think that is in conflict with our goals to create marine protected areas?
It's a tricky question. I think most of all, it has to be looked at the same time. So what's happening right now is that they're actually prioritizing wind farm development, and they're rushing through legislation to designate offshore wind, when I think they should be looking at first protecting the areas that are worth protecting. So it's not necessarily one or the other. I think it needs to be looked at together through the National Marine Planning Framework. Whether or not wind farms are a threat or an opportunity to marine biodiversity, it completely depends on where you put the wind farms. And yeah, Adrian.
If I may,
if you have something to add to that, please.
Yeah, it's just an observation from the difference between working in the UK and maybe observing the situation in Ireland is that how many TDs and how many ministers do you think have got a letter this year about marine protected areas, in Ireland? Maybe very few. And I think what we've been very lucky with in the UK is we have some big membership organisations. RSPB has 1.2 million members of the public. Greenpeace has over 500,000 members that it can turn to. So when we did this Back the Blue Belt campaign, the MPs collectively were being sent thousands of letters and emails and tweets. And, they might have a landlocked constituency that, they probably never go to any of these places, but they still think, God, my constituents care about this because they're looking at David Attenborough and they're looking at Blue Planet. So, we need to get on top of this. So I think one of the first things that, we should try and do is try and build up more public support for this. And if the public asks for it, then TDs will respond and listen. And I see, sorry to jump, but I just see from some of the questions here, it's, how can we have examples of, that aren't on the other side of the world of how these MPAs can work. And I think that's a very good point. I mean, there are actually very good examples in the Mediterranean and around the UK that, and I think we should be look into perhaps doing when the world can travel again, I'd love to try and organize some kind of, fishing community exchange program effectively and we've done this in the UK where we brought fishermen from Greece and from the Aeolian Islands, Spain, brought them to Lyme Bay off the Devon Dorset coast. And they all exchanged stories about how their fisheries had bounced back after they had the MPAs put in place. And, the fishermen will listen to fishermen. They won't listen to people like me. They probably wouldn't want to hear from scientists, but they will listen to other fishermen who say, we used to be skeptical about this, but now actually we've changed our mind. And I appreciate that you can talk about what will happen in Mexico, but these lads are like, I'm not going to Mexico. What's that got to do with the west of Ireland? So I think that would make a big difference. And then I think, Irish politicians need to realize that the public cares about this. And if we're going to be serious about climate change, then we need to change the way we approach agriculture, another discussion, and we need to change the way we approach fishing. And blue carbon is a very serious issue. The blue carbon capacity for the Irish coast is very high from our National Geographic mapping. So if there can be a financial mechanism established whereby if areas are closed to trawling, then the effectively carbon credits can be created for that. Then there's a financial incentive in the short term as well as in the medium to long term when they start catching more fish outside of the closed areas. But we need to be innovative about this from a policy perspective, and really try new things, because we don't have a lot of time, and this is very, very urgent. And I would say to people that the urgency of this is severe. This 9 out of 10 of the big fish in the ocean are gone. 90% of the big fish. So that's like the sharks, the tuna, the grouper, the whales. 90% of them are gone. Where are they gone? We've eaten them. They've all been caught, and we're only now trying to recover them. The impacts of climate change are huge. 90% of the fisheries are either collapsed or overfished. 60% are overfished. So we need to take this seriously, and Ireland has an important role to play. Ireland's an influential member of the EU. We've got a massive marine estate, and we're an important country in these matters. So I think we need to step up.
Yeah, absolutely. I know from, we didn't just start talking about marine protected areas yesterday or the day before, and I know from discussions I've had with certain government officials that they'll just tell you, MPAs won't work in Ireland. It's all very well to have them in the Philippines or in Mexico, but, so I think it's a really important point. We really need some examples to show people so they don't have to travel very far. I do know of a study that was done in Norway where they protected like 1 kilometer squared, like one tiny little square of the ocean for cod. and it wasn't even a no-take zone. They just severely limited the kinds of fishing that could go on. And lo and behold, the cod got bigger and had more babies and produced more cod. So it's not actually that complicated when you put it down to it.
No, it's
Now,
not rocket science.
there's a question in there from Mike, and he touched on something that I had been thinking of myself. I just want to get his question up here, and it's to do with the European Commission's biodiversity strategy, which came out earlier this year. And the European Council, that's the ministers of the different countries, have more or less endorsed it at this stage, and they have said they want to protect 30% of the land and the sea by 2030, but also there'll be 10% that will be what they have called strictly protected.
Yeah.
Now, I often wonder about these percentages, what happens to the other 70% of the sea if we protect 70% of it? Does that mean we can just do what we want in the other 70%? Or how valuable are these kind of targets? Or what do you think of these kind of things? Are we hostage to fortune then if we sign up to them? Yeah, go ahead, Adrian. Yeah, you can come in then afterwards, Regina.
I don't want to be hogging the. I think it's a very good question. So for starters, we should have 30% protected and 70% well managed. There should be nowhere in the global ocean in this day and age that is just the Wild West where you can do whatever you like. But unfortunately, that does persist. And it's another lecture, but the high seas is beyond your 200 miles. You get into international waters, and it really is no man's land out there. There's very little regulation. But so what we should aim for is 30% of the planet's oceans are protected and the other 70% well-managed fisheries. So within that 30%, the question was, what's my view on the 10% being highly protected and the other 20% being protected? Well, I mean, this is not Pristine Sea's view. I don't know. I haven't asked my colleagues' view on it, but my view is if you could get the EU to seriously fully protect 10% of its seas with no-take zones, and then have the other 20% properly well protected, then that would be a serious step forward. And if you remember that graph I showed you, in that 10%, you would have an over 600% return on biomass inside that 10%. And in the other 20%, you'd have a 300% return. 343%. So, after a while, you would have so many fish coming out of that 10% that it would completely change people's attitudes on this, as it has in other parts of the world. So personally, I don't hold much hope, to be honest, for the EU getting its house in order on this, because you have a lot of competing interests, and it's a classic tragedy of the commons, unfortunately. And maximum sustainable yield is not an answer to it, because your baselines are eroding all the time. Anyway, I hope that's a reasonable answer.
Regina, did you want to add anything to that? I mean, is 30% enough? Is 10% with strict protection enough?
Well, first of all, it should be at least 30% by 2030. I think that's kind of the scientific consensus. Of course, it could be more. The strict protection, in my opinion, it should be all strictly protected, really. What is the 10% strict protection going to do that the 30%, that the other 20% aren't doing? It's a little, yeah. I'd like a definition of those, but otherwise, I'd say just highly protect or strictly protect, whatever you want to call it, 30% at least by 2030.
I have a question here. I'm conscious we're after 8 o'clock now, but we'll run over maybe about 10 minutes just to get through the questions that we have here. And one of them I'll put to you first, Regina, is, and it's come up a few times here. How do we get fishermen on board with this? It seems to me kind of crucial in many ways.
It is absolutely crucial. And I think it just comes down to consultation. I think you just have to put a lot of time and effort into getting people together, sit at a table together and figure out what can be done, what needs to be done. And if you just get talking to people and allow them to interact, a lot of them will understand. Of course, there have to be compromises. You can't you know, make the entire inshore Ireland a no-take zone and you know, leave nothing for the inshore guys. Of course not. You just have to sit down and discuss what the options are and explain to them why it's needed, and eventually I think they'll come around. But it's a long process of consultation that's needed, and it wasn't done the last time.
Adrian, I mean, in the UK, I know there are some quite long standing projects you mentioned Lion Bay, there's the Isle of Arran in Scotland, I think. But I haven't seen, you know, even though those models have been successful, I haven't seen them kind of explode across UK waters in the way that you might have expected.
No, they haven't. And that's because, I mean, people won't thank me for saying this, but it's because the government, you know, DEFRA, the Department for Environment, Food, Rural Affairs, is afraid to stand up to the fishing lobby. And, you know, I was on a call only the other week and they were saying, well, you know, I don't think we could do that because the fishermen wouldn't accept it. So, you know, I think it's important for, and I'm very simple, you know, I'm very pro fishing. I'm not anti fishing. I'm pro sustainable fishing. But you know, fishermen do not own the ocean. You know, it's a public good. It's a public asset. Every single citizen of the Republic of Ireland owns the assets that are in the Irish seas. And same in the UK with British citizens. So it's not for one private, it's, you know, it's not for one group to use a public asset for private gain and then decide the rules of the game. I mean, if the government decides that it's in the public's interest that a public asset be protected, then people should obey the law. And it's not just about restoring fish stocks, it's about making sure that there are fishing communities and fishing jobs for the next generation. So it's in fishing's best interest. It's important for climate change. It's important for biodiversity. It's important for other people. For example, like everyone in Dingle that has made a fortune off of the dolphin. You know, there should be equivalents of Dingle in many different parts of Ireland, and that won't happen unless the government has the confidence to say, okay, guys, sorry, but we have judged that this is in the public interest and therefore these marine protected areas need to be observed. And in this day and age, with satellite monitoring that I mentioned earlier, if you look at Global Fishing Watch website, if you look at Ocean Mind as another provider, there are a number of these companies out there doing this for tender. The Irish government could engage these companies just the same way as the UK government has done it, and the law can be followed. So I don't think we should move at the pace of the fishing sector, because by definition, the fishing sector will move slowly because it doesn't like the idea. But it is in the public interest, and there are many more millions of people in the country than fishermen. So I think that fishermen should be brought along, but we shouldn't only go at their pace. This requires leadership and a bit of vision from government. And if that means standing up and telling some hard truths at the outset, then so be it. I think that's what needs to be done.
Leadership and vision. Adrian, I'm putting those things on my Christmas list. I'm writing my Christmas cards now to the politicians. It's getting late. I'm going to have one more question for Regina. Regina, this is from Richard. He says, excellent presentation. Could you say something about the need for effective control of aquaculture, especially Pacific oyster production in marine protected areas? And I think that is an issue that is affecting a lot of communities around Ireland.
Could I say something on that? It's a huge issue and it's very unfortunate. I don't know what's going through the government's head, giving out these licenses in marine protected areas that are protected specifically for mud flats and sand flats, and they think it's okay to just bury them in oyster trestles. again, it's an industrial activity, should not take place in marine protected areas. And in my opinion, under the Habitats Directive, it's not completely legal.
So we're down to process there, really. We're down to the resources that are devoted maybe to doing the assessments for these licenses and procedures.
I think the entire system is faulty. Yes, it's certainly the appropriate assessments. I wouldn't agree with their conclusions. I don't know why that is. The scientific certainty is dodgy at best, maybe. Yeah, it's just huge issues with the entire process. I don't know if it's down to the budgeting or something else, but yeah, it needs an overhaul.
Very good. And we hope, I mean, we know that the National Parks and Wildlife Service got a doubling of its budget recently, and well, we hope that will start the road to recovery in terms of the administration side of things. But so look, it's now 8:10, so I think we'll wrap things up. I want to really thank Adrian and Regina for the wonderful presentations, and certainly I think we got a real insight there into the fantastic potential of marine protected areas, and of course that Ireland could be a world leader, you know, if we wanted to. It comes down to the leadership and the vision, as Adrian said. So I want to thank all the attendees for tuning in. We will be holding more webinars before the end of the year. We've one coming up in a couple of weeks on nature-based solutions to climate change, and we'll have another a nice presentation in the run-up to Christmas. So do stay tuned. And as I said, this webinar has been recorded. It'll be on our YouTube channel. You'll also can catch up on our YouTube channel from the past webinar we did a few weeks ago on regenerative agriculture, which got a great response. So do check these things out. So thank you again, everybody, and good night.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Goodbye. Thanks, Porrick. Good night.